when I heard all this talk about bedfellows, and it was repeated quite a few times, I thought I'd come to the wrong meeting. And I was getting a bit excited. But then, Laura said that she hated cyclists and women's football, and I thought, yeah, great, I'm in the right place after all. Okay. I'm the Honorary President of Free Speech Ireland, who are co-sponsoring this event with JDF. And I first came across them when they invited me to speak on this topic at Wynn's Hotel. It must be 2.5 years ago. And they are an amazing group of young people who deserve all our support and all our appreciation. I took on the responsibility, the completely burdensome responsibility of being Honorary President of Free Speech Ireland on two conditions. One, that I didn't have to do any work. And secondly, that I got all the credit. Okay, and they agreed to these terms, so there we are. I don't do anything and I get all the praise. It's wonderful. In 2019, I formed part of a deputation to the Department of Justice, who were at that time starting the process of what now has become the hate speech bill, or what I call the anti-free speech bill. And I had just published a book on free speech. It's called ZAP. Okay, I'd like you to read it, by the way. I better still buy it and read it, okay, because I need the royalties. So I was well prepared for this. And to be fair to the officers in the Department of Justice, they gave us an extraordinary amount of time. I think the meeting began, and this is from memory, so it might not be accurate. It started around 2:30, and we were still there around 6 or 6:30. And in fact, I brought the meeting to an end. They didn't actually throw us out. And so they were all young, they're all intelligent, they were all well-meaning, and they were all wrong. Okay. And I said several things. So I'll just give you an example. I mean, you could go through it in great detail. But I said, look, one of the reasons why there are people who say unkind things about people in certain groups is because they believe them to have special privileges that they don't have. All right? I'm not saying it's correct. I'm just saying that's why they do it, at least in part. How do you think you will combat that belief? By introducing a law which gives special privileges to those groups. How is that supposed to work? It doesn't work, right? And I would, Andrew Doyle's point about hate. Hate is an effective attitude that is actually quite appropriate in certain circumstances. You should hate injustice. You should hate cruelty. You shouldn't really hate your neighbor. Okay, I can remember what a relief it was to me when I reconverted to Christianity and discovered that loving your neighbor didn't actually mean you had to like them. I was really worried about that. Yeah. Anyway, so look, so I published this book, and of course it had a great effect, which means absolutely none at all, right? And but interestingly enough, the publisher who published that book and another one before that, another one after that, After Me Too, which will make me no friends among the women in this audience, but I don't care. Okay. And then I published a book called Hidden Agenda, which was on the gender topic. That came out in 2021. And like David Hume's treatise on human understanding, it fell stillborn from the press. But interestingly enough, before it was published, my publisher got back to me and said, they had semi-commissioned this, and they said, I have just had a meeting with the editorial team, and I have never experienced so much hostility. And I said, what? No, I kind of let myself go on the After Me Too book, I have to say. I was a bit mischievous from time to time and made a few remarks that weren't necessarily appreciated, but I really held myself in on the Hidden Agenda, and I confined myself strictly to the facts. I made it absolutely clear I wasn't talking about individual human beings. I was talking about an ideology, and in a sense, because I'm a libertarian, you can do whatever you bloody well like, as long as it doesn't offend the zero aggression principle. Okay? I may argue with it about it on moral grounds, but I don't care. You do it. Go ahead. But you mustn't determine what I may or may not do, and especially what I may or may not say. That's the real point. It's not what you do and you say, it's what you are saying I must do, or more to the point, what I must not or cannot do. All right. The bill itself is bizarre in the extreme. So let me, people have talked about the definition of hatred or the definition of gender. There is no definition of gender. Look, basic point in philosophy, I spent my career talking about philosophy. When you give a definition, you cannot take the word that you are attempting to define and put it into the definition. That's just crazy. It's not a circular definition. It's not a definition. There is no definition of hatred in the bill. There is no definition. The gender was read out to you, the so-called account of gender. A gender is a gender, which is a gender, which is a gender, which is a gender. And you go, what? Any normal human being, and even somebody trained in law, is going to have their head spin when they listen to this complete nonsense. Now, we have a real problem. It's not just the hate speech bill, which is hanging over our heads like a sword of Damocles. The Gender Recognition Act 2015, 2004 in the UK, is a cancer at the heart of our legal system. And it says, even though it's defined, its name is the Gender Recognition Act, in section 18, it goes gender, 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 and it finishes up with sex. I don't know how that is. God can't change your sex, but our parliament can. Isn't that interesting? Or rather, the minister can with a stroke of the pen. It's insane. It's literally insane. And it must be repealed. Not amended, but repealed. The bill, the hate speech bill, is incapable of being saved. It cannot be amended. It must be, I feel like Cato here, delenda est Carthago. Carthage must be destroyed. The bill must be destroyed, root and branch. Bin it. Kick it out. Anyway, that's enough for me. By the way, just before I forget that, I was saying to my wife before I came, why do I find myself in a situation where I'm always on the wrong side, the unpopular side? And she said, it's your personality, dear. Okay, and what can I say? Okay, I think she may be right. We are very honored to have on the panel this evening, in addition to Michael Shellenberger, whom we have already heard, we'll have Father Calvin Robinson and Andy No as well. So I'm going to sit down now and we'll get the discussion going. It's already on. This is on? Yeah. Okay, great. One of the things that's come up in different ways in the discussion so far is that, leaving aside particular points, there's a general issue, if you like, of culture here. In other words, we can talk about law, and the legal thing is important, obviously, but also important are the cultural forces which constrain us in ways that also inhibit our free speech. So maybe we could address some of those. You haven't had a chance to talk, Mr. No, so would you like to address that?
Yes, thank you so much. Let me tell you all about a place that is a land of paradoxes when it comes to free speech. Would you believe me that I come from a country that has some of the most robust free speech legal protections in the world? And in my view, I would argue, and yet the people are more afraid to speak out there than here, or Scotland, or England, places that I've have visited in recent years. I'm talking about places like Portland, Oregon in the United States, where I'm from. That was my hometown. And I appreciate the many, many discussions around legislation on free speech. I think one of the potential missing pillars in that discussion is talking about the culture of free speech, because for a law to have legitimacy, it needs to be respected as a cultural norm. And I think in America, even though there is the First Amendment, you have certain pockets in different jurisdictions. I'll speak about my city just because it's quite an extreme example, where an event like this would actually be shut down with political violence by radical extremists who are masked, who will come in with bats and smash up the building and or threaten the establishment or set it on fire the night before. If you are assaulted with pepper spray and you call law enforcement for help, no one will show up. And because your assailants may be captured on CCTV or mobile phone footage, they're masked, you can't identify them, nobody's ever arrested. Rinse and repeat that over and over, you'll have a population that will eventually stop speaking out. And that's the case in Portland. Back in 2016, I was a student journalist at Portland State University. I was working for a student newspaper, and I was assigned to go out with my mobile phone to document the protests that had happened after Trump was announced as the surprise election winner in November. And what I documented were mobs of people dressed in black. At that time, it was unusual to cover one's face, and they were marauding and destroying the city with impunity. And it wasn't just a one-off in reaction to a surprise election outcome. In fact, that type of violence became not just routine, but treated as a banality, and the local elected officials at the state level, the county, the city, all being part of one party, viewed those types of violence as legitimate because it was being done in the name of anti-fascism, in the name of anti-racism, in the name of social justice. So I haven't been to Ireland very many times, but the few times that I've been here, I really see that there is a fire under the feet of many of the citizens here in speaking up and refusing to accept the status quo and the future that your current government wants for you. And that's really inspiring to me because I've seen, unfortunately, in certain parts of America, people who are just beaten down and demoralized and have accepted that we're not going to speak out anymore because we may be beaten and or killed. There have been people who have been killed in Portland, for example, for being a Trump supporter during the 2020 riots. So, yes, terrorism works, violence works, unfortunately, and it can take place in societies that you think the rule of law is really robust and the court system is robust and law enforcement, but there are those who seek to subvert it in all these ways, and the public doesn't even realize it. I appreciate that one of the speakers before talked about how one of the ways that this can manifest is through the media. And in a place like Portland, in some ways is comparable to Ireland in that you have entirely media that is on one side, left-wing. And so people in the wider public aren't even aware of the political extremism that exists and some of the tactics that are being used. So that ignorance is being abused and exploited to silence people quite effectively. So that's my warning and story about where I'm from and why I'm no longer there.
In one of the earlier panels, a mention was made of, if you like, the role of Christianity, whether what we're seeing is in some sense a perversion of that or a continuation in another mode, or whether it's a question of, as it were, that what we are experiencing now is the filling of a vacuum left by it. And I'm going to ask you to address that, if you would, Father Robinson, please.
Of course, thank you. I'd say it's not a perversion of Christianity. I'd say what we're seeing now is the inversion of Christianity. So if you haven't figured, I am a Christian. I was excited to come to Ireland. This is my first time in Ireland. And but I had an image in my head. And we shouldn't do stereotypes, but I had a stereotype in my head. I thought every single street corner would have a priest in a full cassock and a soterno, and there'd be a nun with rosary beads in her hand saying, "Bless you, my child." I thought this is going to be great. And the first thing I'm greeted with is these trans pride flags at the airport. But it's not cultural anymore. This is spiritual. I had to cross that divide. I had to go over that threshold of these trans pride flags. And I go outside, and the next thing I see is the biggest trans pride flag probably in the world, the one you've got on the side of the airport. And then every single place I've been, I went, walking around for a couple of hours yesterday, everywhere, trans, pride, trans. And I actually tried to count how many Irish flags I saw. I think there were 2. And one of them was on a foreign minister's building or something where you'd expect one. So I was like, where is the Irish? But where also is the Christianity? And of course, this is what happens if you strip Christ out. That will leave a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. So that void will be filled with something else. And what we're seeing here is very simple, that you take away the foundation, and eventually a house will crumble. Christ is that foundation. Christ is that cornerstone. And so taking him out means that for now, woke has filled that void. But I'm not actually concerned about woke, not at all. And I know we spent most of tonight talking about woke, but woke is an Ouroboros. Woke is that snake that eats itself alive. Some of the panelists earlier alluded to this, in that what's woke now won't be woke in 5 minutes. Someone who's on side now won't be on side in 5 minutes, because they cancel each other out, because you can't keep up with it. It's impossible, because it's literally insane. It's not logical, it's not pragmatic, it's not truthful, it's not beautiful, it's not good. And so it will destroy itself. And so the problem with having woke in that void right now is that that's not going to last. So what is going to fill the void? And the liberals have been lying to us for the last 20 years, saying that we can have a liberal, progressive, secular society where all ideas and all faiths are equal. And we know that to be a lie too. And this is what it comes down to, is we have a choice, and it's a very binary choice. It's the same in Ireland as it is in the United Kingdom, in that we can either be a Christian country or we'll end up being a Mohammedan country. That is the choice in front of us.
I was waiting for more.
That's it. That's all there is.
Michael Shellenberger, could I ask you something? Earlier on, you spoke about the censorship industrial complex, and which is a kind of collusion between government and big tech companies. Could you give us? It's not obvious why that should be the case, why they should be, as it were, bedfellows. But could you explain why it is and how it is that this comes to be, if indeed it is?
Sure, that's fine. I think it's important to remember that, I think what we're seeing here it's funny because we thought this was a free speech meeting, but it turned out to be a gender critical meeting, right? Really that's the energy in the room. And I think it's important to understand that the demand for censorship by the state it comes out of a longer term process of trying to control the conversation. So all of what we've been talking about, the censorship industrial complex is born really out of 2016, out of the desire from forces within the state to push back against the populist revolutions of Brexit and the election of Trump. And they need to tap into a censorious part of the culture that already exists. And so to be clear, the censorship industrial complex is government-funded NGOs, which often are funded by folks like George Soros or Piero Midyar. They come in first and the government funds them later. It's also the news media, which then have an economic interest in censoring their competitors. And and then of course you've got these government security and intelligence agencies, which it turns out had exerted a significant amount of control over the news media really since World War II. There was some hint of that, there had been some discussion of that, but we didn't realize how entitled they felt to control the news media until we saw them lose control or perceive themselves as losing control after 2016. Now, I do want to say something else about the vacuum, because I agree that the spiritual vacuum is what gave rise to the wokeism and the power, but I disagree that we're going to be able to fill it back with Christianity. And I say that as a Christian, and I say it as somebody that is very skeptical that you can put the toothpaste back in the tube and reconvert the society back to Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, or whatever you want. I think a more probable strategy is to reaffirm the pillars of civilization, which include free speech, cheap energy, law and order, meritocracy, and the protection of children. The truth is that this gender mistreatment is wildly unpopular. And if you don't believe me, look at the opinion polling. We just saw polls come out of California and New York. Roughly 75% of the public is against giving children puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or doing surgeries on them. Have confidence. It's always darkest before the dawn, and this last panel in particular was super dark. But we have broken the trance with the WPATH files. I believe in 3 years we're going to shut down gender medical mistreatment across the Western world.
Hooray.
If not before that. We're not going to convert everybody to Christianity in 3 years, but we're going to reaffirm that puberty is a human right, that children, you do not stop anybody's puberty. You do not perform these grotesque surgeries on children, adolescents, or vulnerable adults. And similarly, we're going to get men out of women's prisons. We're going to get men out of women's sports. We're going to re-protect girls and women's sports in general. These things are going to happen. Have confidence in them.
Just to push back briefly, in love, because you have to have a set of agreed terms, right? We have to agree what is true. And even on the battlefield of putting children first, none of us can agree what that means. So the woke will say they are putting children first when they are affirming their gender fluidity or whatever. But even getting rid of the gender argument, going back to fundamentals of we all want to protect the vulnerable, we all want to protect children. Unless we have Christianity at the heart of that, what does that look like? Well, this country's just passed the most liberal abortion law in the world, in the Western world, which means that we're not putting children first, we're not protecting the vulnerable, and therefore, without that basis of truth, beauty, and love that comes from Christianity, it doesn't really mean anything. That's the problem.
All right, we can come back to the topic again if you wish. But Andy, you in your opening statement, you gave some indication of the violence you'd experienced, and can you say does it come from just one source, or are there multiple sources? Is it just one group of people, or are there more than one?
America is a very polarized society, and there are many, many NGOs and academic organizations and journalists who have whole departments with millions and millions of dollars in funding dedicated to researching and countering the far right. I think for them, there's partially a financial motive in keeping those type of their organizations alive by overstating the size and threat of the violent far right that does exist in America, and that law enforcement does a very good job in infiltrating and prosecuting and getting convictions for those. But when it comes to the violent far left, there's just an entire vacuum. In fact, all these non-profit organizations that allegedly have in their mandate exposing extremism, none of them will focus on the violent far left. And in fact, the few journalists in the US that write about the violent far left, such as I do, who have been victimized by it and have had to flee my home because of repeated acts of violence against me, we are called far-right conspiracy theorists. And you can just Google my name and you'll see conspiracy theorists quite in the things that show up. So it's, I was a bit surprised that I was smeared with that label, just because in the beginning of my journalism career, I actually just went out with my mobile phone to record video. I actually thought that it would be important for people to see footage rather than hearing how I subjectively interpret events that happen around me, which you guys will know in writing is either only part of the picture or misleading or inaccurate. And still, the videos for ideologues on the establishment left, it's not enough. You're still treated as a conspiracy theorist, and I don't know what one can do to convince them, and I actually really lament that, because part of this fight against this violent political extremism that we see in the United States, we have to have partners with Democrats in that. It has been very demoralizing, disheartening to see elected Democrat officials in city to city allying and or making excuses with the violent mass thugs that were operating on the streets. And so it's not a partisan issue at the end of the day, even though in reality it's functioning as such. I don't really have solutions. As a journalist, I try more to just describe how things are. I do think things are quite grim. I think the violent extremists have been reactivated and remobilized over the Palestine issue. That's, for them, just an excuse, really. They go from issue to issue, and they have a larger agenda of agitation for violent revolution that, again, the wider public is not aware of because of the failure of legacy media, and those who shine a light on it are sidelined completely and or intimidated into silence through violence.
It's too gloomy, dude. It's way too gloomy. Look, I mean, it's been a dark period. I'm with you. But I mean, you have to remember every European leader right now is completely unpopular. I mean, France is about to just radically transform. There's been problems in other countries, but I mean, we're talking plummeting levels of popularity by European leaders. California's governor, extremely unpopular. Trump is highly likely to be elected. I think that the gambling sites have Biden at a 33% chance of being reelected. The news media are dying. The Washington Post has a new editor. He just told the staff that their circulation or their readership is down 50% over the last several years. We should celebrate the death of the traditional news media. Celebrate. Do not be disheartened that the traditional news media aren't covering you. Create your own news media. Create Substack. Create X. These are the new news media. Barry Weiss's The Free Press, which is one of the big dogs of this, and Matt Taibbi, they have more subscribers than most regional newspapers in the United States right now, and they're just getting started. So these things are it's going to take some time. But the internet is the new printing press. It's unstoppable. Finally, you have somebody running X that is rich and powerful enough that he can stand up to the deep state. So I think that I do believe that we are entering into a very new moment here, and that once people realize what's been going on with gender, and that really you have a group of autogynephiles that have sold a twisted sex death cult to the entire society, it's going to have a huge impact on the society. Stella didn't deliver the punchline to that argument, but when people understand that you can't change somebody's sex, that they are conducting these grotesque experiments on children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults, that the people doing it are reconstructing a fantasy onto innocent people, it's unforgivable, and it will really change. I think the trans issue is going to destroy center-left parties as we know them. They're going to have no choice but to change, and it's also going to have a huge impact on the news media. So change is coming, and it's been a brutal decade, but I think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
If I could just add another positive to that. Because they have no power. Everyone's afraid of the woke because they're going to cancel us. That's the only thing they have over us. But once you've been cancelled, there's no more power remaining. So when I was invited to come here, someone said, can you talk about when you got cancelled? I was like, what do you mean, when the Church of England cancelled me? When GB News cancelled me? When the Conservative Party cancelled me? Which cancellation do you want to talk about? But I'm still here, right? And this is it.
It's one of the things that the opposition, if you ever have an opposition, want you to do is they want to win the battle as cheaply as possible. And in order to do that, one of the things they will try to do is to persuade you that you have no hope of resisting them, that the battle is already lost, that the best thing you can do is lie down quietly and die. But the battle isn't over. I'm fully in agreement with the previous speakers. The tide is in fact already turning. The insanity that I saw when I wrote my book, which seemed overwhelming, has already, we've seen the CAS report, we've seen the beginnings, the green shoots which are moving in the right direction. And I'm willing to put money down. I'm willing to put money down on Trump, by the way, so if anybody wants to take it, that's okay. But I'm willing to put money down that in 5 or even 10 years, all of those people pushing the trans activist agenda will be saying, what? I never said that. What are you talking about? This never happened. And I'll go, well, it's all there. We all have the right. No, it wasn't me. It must have been somebody else. So you do have to fight. You do have to be prepared to put up with a lot of crap, okay? But here's the good thing. I remember when I was starting out in philosophy, one of my mentors said to me, Mr. Casey, you can never be a philosopher. I said, why is that? He said, you're too happy. Okay, and I'm still happy. I'm what you might describe as a pessimistic optimist, okay, which is that I expect the worst and I hope for the best, okay? And the best is coming. As Calvin has just said, they can only cancel you so many times. For many years, I resisted the impulse to go on Twitter. And since David Quinn's name has already been mentioned, I can take it again. He, over a cup of tea, I'm cheap, over a cup of tea, he persuaded me to go on, and I said, okay, well, look, I'll do it, provided you take me by the hand and walk me through it, but I think this is insane, okay? And my very first tweet, because my Twitter handle is Casey5122dark, and everybody said, what's with the dark? And I said, because in going on Twitter, I've gone over to the dark side. Okay. But I haven't gone over to the dark side. And I suddenly realized that, whereas before, I can remember a time when I came back to Ireland in 1986 from the United States, and if I read something in the Irish Times, God forgive me, but that's a sin that needs repentance. Okay, I would write a letter. It was handwritten, sent off, and it might or might not be published. But if it was published, it would be 5 or 6 days later. The topic would have been dead. Now, if I'm irritated in the morning, which I generally am by reading The Guardian, okay, I can fire something up on Twitter in the space of 5 minutes. Okay, and I can say more and more often and better than I could have done in a week, in a month of Sundays before. And so thank God for Elon Musk and thank God for Twitter and social media generally, because they have allowed us to do what C.S. Lewis described once as slipping past watchful dragons. And the gatekeepers of the mainstream media can no longer keep us out. They can no longer shut us up. We're here, we're not going anywhere, and we are not, repeat, not going to lie down and die.
One thing. And Andy No has 1.4 million Twitter followers, you guys. I mean, seriously. You guys remember Mumford & Sons? He broke up the band. That was Andy No. And now he's friends with the best banjo player in the world as a result of it. And we're friends because we have the mutual friend in Mumford & Sons. So don't be so gloomy, man. We're coming back. Say a positive word.
This was alluded to briefly earlier, but it's controversial but important to talk about. I think, so we talked about numerous threats to free speech, woke/gender ideology, authoritarian technocracy, and this is something Americans don't quite understand, but it's closer to home for you here. One of the, I think, one of the big threats you have here to free speech that will be multi-generational of an issue is that the threat from violent political Islam. We've seen how Charlie Hebdo was a long time ago. People kind of forgot what that kind of normalized on the entire continent in regards to satire, jokes, critiques of one particular religion, and how people seemingly sometimes, not just people who are involved in terrorist groups, normal people feeling that they need to take up some type of weapon or arms and to kill in response. And that's a challenge you have here. Sorry, not positive.
There's a solution to that, though. There's a very easy solution to that. Every day in the Mass, we say, lift up your hearts. We say, I lift them up to the Lord. That's it. Submit our humble hearts to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That is the answer. That solves all of these problems.
On that note, we have just a few minutes for some questions. Okay, so.
Thank you very much. What a great panel. We had some disagreement, but that's fine. We're a free speech conference, so disagreement is fine. I had one really interesting question I wanted to ask about the cancellation of venues. So that's a tactic we seem to see happen. Activists put pressure on venues and they cancel. You might have noticed that we didn't release the location of this venue until quite late, and that was done deliberately. So what do you think can be done about this, first of all, legally? And what do you think can be done culturally? And what sort of chilling effect on free speech do you think that has?
Many of you may know that there's a conference called the National Conservatives, and they had a meeting in Brussels recently, and Brussels apparently has like 3 mayors. We don't totally follow
19 municipal mayors.
What's that?
19 municipal mayors.
Right. So apparently they had their first venue canceled, then their second venue canceled, and they got their third venue. And by the way, the third venue, the owner of it was a Muslim who was very proud to host them. And then the police came in and tried to shut it down. And you may know the story. The police walked in to try to shut it down, and every single TV camera turned on the police, and then they turned tail and ran out and held a little line in front. And it was an awful experience for the organizers. We wrote about it. I certainly wasn't there, but it made the story much bigger. And so I think there's two problems for the censorship Nazis. The first problem is that once you're censored, it's a little bit like being canceled. You're battle hardened, and if you don't die, you are much stronger to go into another battle, and you're not going to forgive the people that did it. You're not going to forget about it. The second thing is there is this little thing called the Streisand effect. My book Apocalypse Never, I had the fortune and misfortune of having the book censored by Facebook, but thanks to that, it generated international publicity. It's now published in 18 countries, a bestseller, 16 languages. Thank you. So we do have these resources at our disposal, and so look, fight back. If they cancel us, then demand a boycott of that venue in the future. Never use them again. Name and shame them. Eventually you're going to find somebody that will stand with you and that will allow you to be there. And those are the people that you need to reward. We need to build alternative networks, alternatives to Wikipedia, alternative media, alternative locations. That's just where we're at right now. And I think it's out of that darkness is the potential to build something really bright and beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite fitting that you mentioned the NatCon conference, because ADF International is actually proud to be involved in helping overturn that final order that was given to shut it down, where they did send the riot police in, and our executive director was actually there speaking, and we're very proud that was overturned. So thank you for mentioning it. Alliance Defending Freedom. Yeah. So then another question was about, we had a question about buffer zones from an audience member. And for those who are not aware, in the UK, they've imposed these buffer zones around abortion centres where even silent prayer is made illegal. And we even had a case where ADF is supporting where a woman just holding a sign which says, here to talk if you want to, so nothing to do with abortion whatsoever, is now being criminalised, and we're supporting her case. So to what extent do you think these almost like meme cases are showing that free speech is on the ropes, especially in the UK, but throughout the West? And Calvin, I know you have covered this story on your show before, but does this show a broader authoritarian turn that we're seeing? To even that thoughts now are criminalized?
100%. Thank you for raising this one. This is what I talk about wherever I go, because I still can't believe it when I say it out loud, that silent prayer is outlawed in the United Kingdom in certain places. So if you don't know, these buffer zones, PSPOs, we call them buffer zones, are geographical areas around abortion centers where they want to protect the satanic sacraments. They want to protect the right to abortion, as they call it, so badly that they've outlawed not just harassment and intimidation, which should be outlawed and already was, but they've outlawed the idea of giving out literature, so offering these vulnerable women an alternative solution. And if you don't know about our National Health Service, or as we call it, our National Death Service, they're pushing abortion on women at the moment. They're saying things like, your child may have a deformity, there may be a disability. Whether there's proof of that or not, you should go ahead and maybe think about abortion as an option. The idea there being that human life is determined, the value of human life is determined on how healthy you are. But anyway, this whole buffer zone situation, they've put in the law explicitly to outlaw silent prayer. So we've now got 4 instances of people that have been arrested for being in an area, not outside the abortion center, but in a general area of it, standing there, doing nothing, saying nothing, not protesting, not harassing, not intimidating, but just praying to their creator to save the lives of these vulnerable unborn babies. And the UK government has said that that's a step too far. And the Prime Minister in the Houses of Parliament said, I have to balance these rights, right? So the right of a woman to have an abortion versus the freedom of worship. But this so-called right to abortion isn't being threatened by anyone anywhere, whereas our freedom of worship absolutely is being discriminated against, and people are being arrested and persecuted for praying, for being Christians in a Christian country. And so, yes, thought police is a very real thing. This is 1984. I know you said it hasn't been mentioned yet, but it should be, because we're living in it. It is real, it's true, and we have to fight against it. And I think the answer actually is to pray. The answer is, of course, we can all pray wherever we are, but go to these places and to pray. And, you know, our Christian duty is to disobey immoral laws, and this is a very immoral law. So if anyone wants to join me, let's go.
Thank you, Calvin.
I just wanted to say that, just before I hand over to Professor Casey to wrap up here, we'll then be referring to Sarah O'Reilly, who is the CEO of Free Speech Ireland, who will be giving us some very final closing remarks. And just once again, I'd like to extend that invitation to everyone here to join us at the hotel for our reception later on. We want to keep this conversation going. We'd love to see you all there. So thank you very much.
Well, this is extraordinarily un-Irish because we're actually right on time. I can't believe it. Okay, and unless I shut up shortly, we'll go overtime. So let me just thank Calvin, Michael, and Andy for their contributions to this. And now I'd like to invite the CEO of Free Speech Ireland, Sarah O'Reilly, whom I blame for my elevated position as president.
Thank you, Gerard, and everyone who's come here this evening. I especially want to thank our international guests this evening, not just for coming so far, but we are completely indebted to you as a nation, because we are not getting the attention that this deserves in the mainstream media, in the political class, anywhere that this issue is directly going to play out in terms of results. So thank you. Thank you for allowing us to have online content, and that is the media that we use to make this issue possibly spread across this country. So we are hugely indebted to you all. Thank you very much. This group and this movement in Ireland is a true grassroots one. So I say to anyone here, please take your citizenship seriously. If that's in a voting booth or aligning yourself with a cause you believe in, please do not take that for granted. Don't take anything for granted. Don't take your freedom for granted. No rights. Take nothing for granted. And join whatever you believe in. Do not let them stop us in whatever we pursue. Thank you all for coming, and please join us afterwards. Thank you very much.